talk about how Canada is perceived and to put a sort of reality check on the opportunities. And no one better to do that than a native Western Canadian who is now resident in the region and also a good friend of CWF. Stephen.
So thanks very much, Carlo, and thanks very much to the Canada West Foundation. It's a great pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm from Alberta, but I've lived and worked in the region for about 25 years now, including Hong Kong and Japan, and traveled extensively through the region. So just last week I was in Hanoi, the week before Singapore, and I'm off to Australia next week. So I'm trying to bring in that perspective of how, one, the Indo-Pacific countries are looking at Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. And here I'll say a few words: schizophrenic. Will it be sustained? And three, is it a securitized policy? On that first point, schizophrenic, the document starts with a very strong statement about China, which I think is well noted and important. Doesn't really talk about the strong and robust trading relationships that Western Canada does have with the region. Quite frankly, and I think Canada West Foundation's own research has shown that during the pandemic, during the highest point, I think, of tension between China and Canada, trade between Western Canada and China increased. This relationship is a net good for Canada. However, it does have many challenges, and I'll pivot back to what Mac and Meredith said in these two comments. So schizophrenic is one aspect of the policy. Second, I think, is looking at sustainability. Is it sustainable? There's real questions about how $2.3 billion of a budget will be distributed amongst 19 departments over a region so large over 5 years. And this is something that is, it sounds like a lot of money, but if you've been talking and engaging with the different departments, you find out that the money just starts to disappear very, very quickly. Third, and I think importantly, as we're looking at how the Indo-Pacific countries are looking at Canada's presence within the region, is really what can Canada offer to the region? And this is something that is fascinating, and there's not enough knowledge about Canada, Canadian products in the region. And this is perhaps where the agricultural office that is going to be set up needs to do a much better branding job to ensure that the region understands what Canada has to offer to the region. And this is something that you hear over and over. Canada's a great place. It has nice mountains. It's probably cold, but what does Canada really offer to the region in terms of resources is something that needs to be, I think, brought out. A second point that I wanted to mention in this discussion has to do with the document itself and how I think that it has mismatches for the region's needs. As I mentioned, despite what the Canada West Foundation's research finds in terms of increased trade despite the limitations of the pandemic, we see a lot of focuses in the document that really don't echo in the region, in particular on the progressive issues, on talking about working on reconciliation, on Aboriginal issues, and frankly, even the environment. We need to be very selective of how we work in the environment in this region because of the different levels of development. So there is a document mismatch that I think really distracts the strategies, its good intentions from enhancing trade within the region. Another question, and this kind of delves into what Meredith said in terms of the China question, that the Indo-Pacific strategy is replacing a China strategy. I'm on a different page here. I think that the strategy is advocating for selective diversification away from China. I say selective because we're talking about high tech, we're talking about sensitive industries, we're not talking about agriculture, we're not talking about resources. And it charts out a path for energy for Canada being an energy security provider, a food security provider, and others, which suggests that Canada can engage with China at the same time as it's finding new partners. And the Agricultural Office and the ASEAN Gateway are going to be important tools. And this again speaks to Meredith's point about implementation. This will all take place and have success or failure depending on how we implement this strategy. I want to also talk about this point of resilience, because it speaks to Mac's ideas about barriers to trade. And I think what he's really referring to is bystanders of geopolitics. Resilience in trade is a broader theme in the region. Resilience has to do with the disruptions of supply chains that were associated with the COVID-19 pandemic and policy choices within China, but also the broader realization that the geopolitics is really driving a selective diversification away from China in particular sectors, not in the agricultural sector, not in the forestry sector. So I think that with a better understanding of the resilience trends and how the Indo-Pacific strategy will be implemented, Western Canadian businesses can better position themselves to understand how they can maximize their leverage within these trends. Just a couple suggestions, and this is something that I see in the region, is that the provinces each have an office within the region, but I don't see enough coordination between the Western Canadian offices. So I'm based in Tokyo. We have a Saskatchewan office, an Alberta office, a Quebec office, and a BC office. And the coordination could be enhanced to engage in the region through shared interests. And I do understand that each province has their comparative advantages and their products that they'd like to get out to the region. But again, it speaks to how we need to find areas of cooperation, and that intra-provincial cooperation of Western provinces may position themselves, give them a stronger position within the region where they can promote each other's interests. They can perhaps help shape the agricultural office so it maximizes a sense of how to engage within the region, but also ensure that the agricultural office is engaged in a policy approach that is more synergistic with Western Canadian ideas, Western Canadian comparative advantages, and how they want to engage in the broader Indo-Pacific region. So I'll stop there so we can have some room for Q&A. Just a few thoughts. Thanks.